It's the week ending Friday the 17th of February, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen President Trump's security advisor resign, Kim Jong-un's half-brother killed, and that there will be a sequel of sorts to the movie Love Actually. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. The big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And with me today, from the week's digital team, are Holden Frith, Arion McNicoll and Rebecca Gillie. And to start the show with her top pick of the week, it's Rebecca. What have you brought with you?
This is something that might test your taste for off-colour humour.
Hello, Jesus here. Just want to let you all know that Hitler did absolutely nothing wrong. He only wanted to act upon God's will. Don't worry though, he stands beside God now. He is in heaven. That's all, folks. Jesus out.
That was unbearable YouTube star PewDiePie, more cumbersomely known as Felix Arvid Ulf Kjellberg, with one of the hilariously controversial videos he created last month. Now, Rebecca, after an investigation by the Wall Street Journal into a few videos in this series, Disney pulled PewDiePie's contract to make films with them. His career's imploding. But so what? Why do we care? Why is this important?
Yeah, so he had this deal with Maker Studios, which is owned by Disney, and he was going to oversee his own kind of entertainment content platform, and now that's all off. Obviously, a lot of people have leapt to his defence saying, you know, he's not really a Nazi, he's just being controversial, and there was a video where he paid 2 Indian men to hold up a banner that said "Death to all Jews," and he said, well, my point was to demonstrate how crazy the modern world is that people would do this online for $5.
And to be fair, that point was demonstrated, wasn't it, through the video?
It was aptly demonstrated.
I didn't assume from seeing that he was racist.
No.
I just thought it's a bad taste joke.
So what it brings up to my mind is, are we defining issues like this too simply? I think we tend to divide them into, if it was a joke, then fair play, and if it wasn't a joke, then, you know, they're evil and they must be stopped. Where is there a middle ground where, well, maybe he isn't being serious, but is he still normalising that kind of casual use of anti-Semitic language and hateful language in general?
Isn't it more that people just don't expect a man who essentially has made a career for himself inspiring teenagers by talking over video games in a terrible way to do anything satirical and intelligent? So, not that I'm saying this is particularly intelligent, but when he tries to make a statement about something else, people don't expect it from him. The rules are different. If a comedian did this, then maybe you would accept it.
I think there's something in that, and it feels as though if you look at the full body of his
oeuvre,
anti-Semitic humour, his oeuvre of anti-Semitic jokes, they veer from the clip that we've just heard to stuff which is pretty clearly on the nose to stuff that's actually a bit less clear. There was one that I saw that had PewDiePie wearing a Make America Great Again Donald Trump red cap and watching a video of Hitler orating, you know. And was that anti-Semitic? That seemed clearly a comment about Donald Trump. And so I'm not quite sure if, I think...
I watched the 2 Indian boys with the banner saying "Death to all Jews," and in a way it seemed to me that the anti-Semitism was the least loathsome part of it, because what you had there was a millionaire Swedish man paying 2 Indian kids to essentially humiliate themselves for all of our entertainment. But I do think YouTube have probably got the balance right here, in that they, like Disney, have kicked him out of their elite partnership scheme, so they don't want to sort of ally with him. They're still allowing him to stay on the platform, so they're sort of preserving that freedom of speech element. They're not saying he's transgressed their kind of basic platform rules.
Because he hasn't.
No.
I mean, it's clearly, even though it's a bad joke, it's clearly
Exactly.
a joke, so it's not the same as just making the statement.
Yeah, so they don't want to say, we're on board with him, these reflect our values, but they also say, we respect his right to infringe our values.
But it's more than that, isn't it, Rebecca? Because, you know, we talk about this as Disney, but as you say, this is Maker Studios owned by Disney. Well, Disney own lots of things. You know, Disney own ESPN. Disney were part of the distribution company that put out Pulp Fiction. You know, not everything that Disney owns corresponds with our image of Mickey Mouse and Disneyland, you know, and they clearly differentiate. The stuff that's family friendly is the stuff they release under the banner of Walt Disney Studios. So is there actually an immaturity with YouTube stars?
What I think it boils down to is that Disney is not wanting to associate itself with what's being termed as the alt-right. Now, there's no evidence that Kjellberg is a member of the alt-right or sympathises with them in any way. But if you look at what was happening during the US elections, if you saw Pepe, the green frog character, started off as a meme on 4chan that wasn't political, and it kind of took on a new life as a symbol of the alt-right. But a lot of people still argue it's a joke, it's a meme, it's a 4chan reference. But it's kind of blurred that line between humour and satire and saying taboo stuff to get a reaction. Same thing as we've had with, what's his name, Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yeah.
You know, where does the line stop between this is a joke, I'm saying it to get a reaction, but actually I kind of think this and I want to hear it said in the mainstream?
When I sat down to watch that clip, I sort of wanted to be on PewDiePie's side. I wanted it to be okay in the same way that when I sit down to watch something like Family Guy, I want for their edgy humour to be on the right side of not being racist or sexist or homophobic. And do you know what? After a while of watching enough of Family Guy, I just had to stop watching it because I wasn't confident that that was in the right place. And
That's
maybe
funny. I had exactly that experience as well. And it's interesting because South Park is the opposite experience.
I agree.
That's
Exactly,
equally crude and bad taste,
But
and they'd make jokes about the same things.
Like they're on our team.
Well, they're
It's
saying
okay.
something clever, aren't
yeah,
they?
it's safe. We're safe here. Maybe I just haven't watched enough PewDiePie to know whether he is safe.
I have
or not.
watched enough PewDiePie.
I think what you're saying earlier about the immaturity comes into play as well, because especially with young people, you know, they know that the Holocaust was something bad that happened that's a taboo to talk about lightly. Same with rape jokes, things like that. But if you don't fully understand the context of why they're taboo, it's easy to conflate them with things like saying a swear word, which is a taboo in the sense that simply invoking a swear word can cause laughter, you know, if you're of an immature mindset. So it leads to instances like this where there's not really a satirical element a lot of the time.
Yes,
Simply
although
saying it
my
provokes
reference to
laughter.
maturity was actually to do with the corporate maturity of Disney, not just the YouTubers making the content. You know, Disney have a different approach, it seems, when it comes to a YouTuber saying something to they would if, I don't know, they'd backed a film made by Michael Moore to take a political, you know, view of a different kind.
I think it does raise a real problem for Disney and other mainstream companies who are trying to kind of ride the wave of YouTube stars, Instagram stars, and they want to kind of tap into that spontaneity, the cachet that they have. But that means sort of handling them at arm's length. And if they do start to kind of make them sit through corporate compliance meetings, they're going to lose all of the energy that they wanted to try and tap into in the first place.
And what's going to happen now is that the word PewDiePie, if that's a word, is going to be conflated with words like Nazi on Google forever. Is that the end of PewDiePie as a sort of social phenomenon?
Well, it didn't end him when Daily Stormer rebranded their front page to say they were his #1 fan site. So clearly his 53 million followers are not, by and large, put off by this. But again, I think that goes back to the idea that a lot of them are young and maybe don't fully understand why casually referencing death to all Jews might not be a hilarious, edgy joke.
And we're picking out stories here that we think have repercussions beyond this week. What's the lesson here that we'll still be talking about in 2 years' time? I mean, is it this sense that riding the wave of influencers, trying to use YouTube stars as a way to sell units, promote products and do, you know, family-friendly tie-ups was misguided?
I think it's really something that we have to watch, this idea that we're opening the door for humour to introduce these hateful ideas. It's something I don't think we've really seen before, the way it's happening now. A lot of Trump's hardcore right-wing supporters, particularly the young ones, would joke on Twitter a lot in the lead-up, in the aftermath of the election, that they had memed their way to victory. They had introduced their ideas through humour and through basically mocking already marginalised groups and thinking that they were being edgy by doing so, when really they were just doing the same thing that oppressing groups have always done through history.
I think it may have touched a particular nerve now because of the worry that, if not Trump, then a lot of his supporters have made anti-Semitism more, I don't want to say acceptable, but they've made it less of a taboo than it once was.
Okay, Arion, you're up next. What have you got for us?
So this is a man who likes to wear silk pyjamas, offering some pearls of wisdom to his younger self.
After launching Playboy magazine in 1953, you will change yourself again. You'll come out from behind the desk and become Mr. Playboy, the embodiment of the magazine you created. You'll even inspire those around you to reinvent themselves. The girl next door will become an international sex symbol through the pages of Playboy. Librarians, lawyers, and even your own secretary will use Playboy as a tool to reimagine themselves. Millions of readers will aspire to live the Playboy lifestyle, and you will challenge them to question what they believe about sex and sexuality, about personal freedom and civil rights.
Nobody's ever sounded cooler so soon after putting their teeth in. Hugh Hefner there, Playboy's founding father, in a retrospective he took part in a couple of years ago for CBS. Arion, why are Playboy in the news this week?
So the magazine removed nudity from its pages a year ago.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I subscribe.
Yeah. You heard about it.
Yeah.
And at the time, the then CEO, a guy called Scott Flanders, said that basically the decision had been made because every sexual act was just one click away, now that the internet is one big porn hub. So 1 year later, however, they've pretty much reversed that decision, and they've decided to bring back nudity. The first edition of, the very next edition of the magazine is going to go out with nude models again, and the hashtag naked is normal. So they're trying to reposition the brand from their previous repositioning.
But it's a bit more than that, though, isn't it? Because they are bringing nudity back, but that clearly from that hashtag and other things they've tried to do, they're bringing nudity back in the sense of the Marilyn Monroe topless shot, not the spread eagle 1980s stuff. They're clearly saying what we don't want to be is filth. We want to be a classy men's magazine, but actually Playboy always did have nudity in it, and what's wrong with printing topless pictures?
I think that's right, and the magazine is now overseen by a new creative chief officer called Cooper Hefner. You'll probably be able to guess who he's related to. And he said that it was a mistake to have taken nudity off the pages, but basically it was the way that nudity had been presented rather than the nudity itself that was outdated. And I think what's even more interesting about this latest rebranding, perhaps, is that they've decided to drop the subtitle Entertainment for Men, which could suggest that they're trying to open themselves up to new ideas and more contemporary ideas about gender and sexuality. Will that mean that we start to see naked men in the pages of Playboy? I sincerely doubt it, but it's an interesting shift in what Playboy has represented in the past and could again.
Probably more likely just saying, look, women, if you like ladies, you can buy this too. I mean, they're clearly chasing sales, aren't they, Rebecca? Is there anything wrong, theoretically, with bringing nudity back?
I think by removing the tagline Entertainment for Men, I do wonder if what they're trying to do is maybe target lesbian women to pick up the magazine, or whether they're saying that women are no longer entertainment for men. They're not objects that men consume. I was prepared to be mildly outraged about the return of the nudity. But then when I read the Playboy philosophy, which is a manifesto that Hugh Hefner published in 1962, I was surprisingly impressed. It's nearly 300 pages long, and it tackles themes like, there are sections entitled Society and the Individual, Puritanism in American Thought. It's very in-depth, and if that was his foundation philosophy in creating Playboy, it's very much in keeping with this return to nudity, because that was really his central argument in the 1960s, is that nudity is natural, sexuality is natural, we should all celebrate it. But on the flip side, let's be honest, the men they're hoping are going to buy it are not buying it as a gesture of agreement with the concept that nudity is normal. I mean,
solidarity with the sexual liberation of the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, they're buying it for titillation. And if nudity is normal, but then if they're trying to capitalise on this kind of real women, real bodies movement, then is that ever really going to happen in the pages of Playboy? Are they going to be putting, larger women with disabilities, or is it just going to be the same? The same models with stripped down makeup.
But do people say that about Heat's torso of the week? It seems to me, as a man, I accept that Heat has a topless photo of a man in it every week, and it's usually the same kind of man. They don't look like me, and it doesn't bother me. Now, I know it's easy to say yes, but women are objectified more all over the place, and, men can handle it. That's probably true, but I mean, a glamorous topless shot of a woman who's choosing to be in the pages of Playboy, in the context of the internet, does seem rather inoffensive.
There's a hypocrisy about trying to simultaneously capitalise on feminist society, saying, yes, nudity is normal, free the nipple, this kind of thing, and then also, but buy our magazine to masturbate over it.
Or under it. Holden.
The manifesto and the statements that are being made may well be well meant, but I think there is a sort of cynical money-grabbing current underneath. And apparently the move to remove nudity was all about trying to clean up the brand, particularly in China and India, where 40% of Playboy's revenue now comes from through licensing deals for clothes with the Playboy bunny logo. And there are very strict rules on pornography. So the theory is that they were trying to kind of clear the way to expand in those markets. I don't know whether the reversal means that didn't work or that it has worked, or what that means.
I think also there was a publishing motivation that, you know, in Playboy's height in the 1970s, they were selling 5.6 million copies, and as recently as last year, when they introduced the nudity ban, they were on about 800,000 per edition. So it's been this massive decline. So they were trying to reposition themselves to be more competitive with the Vanity Fairs and the GQs of the world. But it didn't work, and they're now on 700,000 copies per month. So, yeah.
So nobody really was buying it for the articles, as it turns out.
Yeah.
The interesting sort of footnote to that is they did actually manage to attract more advertisers. So it sort of ties into what we were saying earlier about corporate brands being happier to associate themselves with a slightly cleaner product. But that's no good if you're not going to get any readers in to see those adverts. So they lose either way, it seems.
Would you accept an invitation to the Playboy Mansion? I'm just curious. You're in Hollywood now for whatever reason.
Well, it doesn't belong to Hefner anymore, does it?
Doesn't matter. I'm sure he can pull strings.
He lives there, that's right.
He's on the phone. He's like, I love the week unwrapped. Arion, come to the Playboy Mansion. Would you go, yes or no? Or would you make a stand?
Probably, out of idle curiosity.
Okay, Rebecca, would you go?
It depends. Are there any men there, or is it still?
Of course, there's men there. There's men there, but there's
like
also
gross old men.
What kind of men you want to see?
Actually, no. I'm sorry that I said that about Hugh Hefner, because I was just saying how progressive his 1962.
I'm sure at Playboy parties,
I would love to.
There probably are topless
hand.
men serving drinks as well. There probably are. It's a pool party.
It's a bit. This is the thing, though, isn't it? It's all a bit. The idea of staging nudity is quite dated.
Okay, yeah, but basically you'd go. Holden, would you go to a party at the Playboy Mansion?
I would go.
There we go. Right, so we'd all go to a party at the Playboy Mansion. So I think on some level, Hugh Hefner did establish something interesting, didn't he? If we're still talking about it 40 years later. Right, Holden, you're going to close the show. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
I think it will be remembered for this heretical take on Shakespeare.
You know, we know that Othello talks about himself as black, but the figure of the blackamoor in this period, actually, it's invariably a reference to Muslims. And of course, early in the play, Othello says this. He says that he's been taken by the insolent foe and he's been sold into slavery, and then his redemption thence. That clearly suggests that he is a Muslim who is taken by the Turks, and then he is converted to Christianity, and that's why he's in Venice. And that notion of him as a Moor, the Muslim, that really is the centre of gravity of the play. It's this question about religion and the assimilation of those kind of Islamic figures.
Historian Jerry Broughton there, talking about a new production of Othello, which opened this week at the Tobacco Factory in Bristol. You can hear the full feature on Front Row, BBC Radio 4's programme, available now on the iPlayer radio app. Holden, let's brush up on our Shakespeare for a moment. Give us a potted guide to Othello, if you can, the York Notes version.
So Othello is described throughout the play as a Moor, and Moor was much more closely associated with the idea of an Islamic figure. He is married to Desdemona, who is the daughter of a Venetian noble, and is then tricked into believing that Desdemona has been unfaithful by Iago. And hilarity ensues.
It doesn't.
Tragedy ensues.
Is there anything particularly radical about this interpretation then that says he's a Muslim? Why does that matter?
Well, it's interesting because I think the prevailing view of the play has really been to look at it as a study on race rather than religion.
Yeah, Othello's normally played by a black actor.
Yes.
Or
previously
20 years ago, a white actor blacking up. Yeah.
Blacked up. And I think that to go to the other extreme and say it's a play only about religion and not at all about race is a stretch. But I think maybe no more than a stretch than to say it's solely about race and not religion. There's very little in the play that suggests precisely where Othello came from. The best guess, based on a couple of references, is that he was from the Barbary Coast, essentially modern-day northern Morocco and Algeria. It feels as if the portrayal of him by actors who are either from an Afro-Caribbean or a Sub-Saharan African or an African-American origin is really a result of us seeing it through the lens of 20th, 21st century race relations. And so it's not all that surprising that we might start to look at it through the lens of religious integration and religious anxiety.
Well, that's it, isn't it? So making him a Muslim, actually, as much as anything, is about seeing it through the lens of 21st century political relations. And Arion, that's what's always happened with Shakespeare, isn't it? And in a way, that's why Shakespeare's brilliant.
Definitely, and one of my favourite Onion headlines is "Radical Director Sets Play in Time and Place Shakespeare Intended." I think the thing that we need to ask ourselves is whether this is going to enlighten anything or bring out anything new about the text that we hadn't thought previously. And much as there is race and or religion in the play, it's always seemed to me that it's a play about jealousy, you know? It's about this guy, Iago, who makes Othello think that his wife is cheating on him and drives him to the ultimate, most disastrous version of jealousy you could possibly imagine, which is murdering her. So I don't quite know why it would matter whether he was a Muslim or some sub-Saharan Africa. You know, I don't know why race matters, really.
I think it matters because it does tell us something about the present day. Later in the interview this clip came from, Jerry Brutton said that during the 20th century, Othello did good work in the anti-apartheid and civil rights movement, and now that it's time for it to take its role in this sort of religious conflict that has been brewing. But I think it also actually is a way of looking at Elizabethan England afresh. I was a little bit sceptical at first, but having gone back to the text, looked at a bit of writing about it.
Bloody hell. This is the first time someone's turned to Shakespeare to research this podcast.
It seems that actually Elizabethan England might have been closer to our idea of religious tension than it was to 20th century ideas of racial tension. This was a period that was after the Crusades, but before the British Empire really got going. I did a Control F search of the text. The word black is used 11 times, and less than half of those are applied to Othello. The word Moor applies 60 times. Elizabeth I had befriended the Moorish invaders of Spain because Spain was obviously her great enemy, and at this time Spain was clamping down on Moors, forcing them to convert to Christianity, and she actually gave Moors the freedom of the city of London, invited a lot over, and there was a great deal of angst about Islamic figures coming into the city, marrying our women, bringing their foreign ways, and she, towards the end of her reign, actually expelled them all again in her own version of the Trump travel ban. And this is...
I think you've just come up with another radical interpretation of the play, Holden.
And so this is the context in which Shakespeare was writing.
If you look at the play, I think, in actual fact, it's more damning of the Venetians than it is of Othello as representative of all Moorish kind. You know, the villain of the piece is Iago, obviously, and it's about a man being undone by villainy, but that villainy is Venice. So, you know, that's an interesting take from Shakespeare, that even if Queen Elizabeth had been pro-Moorish and then anti-Moorish, his own view was that perhaps he was pro-Muslim.
The reason Shakespeare is always so amenable to different political interpretations is that he tends to see the humanity in everyone, except maybe Argo. He's one of very few characters who doesn't have any redeeming feature.
Yeah, but you still like him, don't you? I mean, he's still entertaining to watch.
As much as you like PewDiePie.
Yeah. I can't believe you've made that comparison. In PewDiePie's great soliloquy.
But I think as well that, you know, The Merchant of Venice is another really good example of this. It's probably the only play that was officially sanctioned in both Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. Because in Nazi Germany it was seen as, you know, they just played up the anti-Semitic elements in it. In Stalinist Russia it was seen as a comment on capitalism and the dangers therein. And now I think we try and see The Merchant of Venice as a play about anti-Semitism more than a play that exhibits anti-Semitism.
There's a very strong element of wishful thinking in modern interpretations of Shakespeare. Lots of people also try and reinterpret Taming of the Shrew to be a feminist text, which is it's quite literally almost impossible, but their way of approaching it is to say, well, actually Shakespeare was making fun of these patriarchal figures who destroy Catherine's spirit, and you're not supposed to approve of them. But then I do think there is a strong element of wishful thinking to that. I think given the circumstances in which he was born, you know, Shakespeare wasn't a saint and he couldn't see into the future. I think it's probably very unlikely that he had a positive opinion of Jews, Muslims or women.
But almost despite himself, he wrote them all as incredibly strong characters who you can sympathise with.
Although I do think there is sometimes a tendency with plays now to put a political interpretation on it that strains credibility slightly. I was thinking just now of, I went to see Man on Lisco at the Royal Opera House. It was Jonathan Kent's version, so the original story, she's a poor girl who's married off to this disgusting rich man, and she becomes kind of a courtesan type figure, and then she's deported to America. This was restaged as she was kind of an East European cool girl who was forced into porn, and then it doesn't make any sense at the end why you don't understand why she's going to America. The story has been, the staging and the words don't match each other because the staging is trying so hard to put this very specific political spin on it that this kind of jars with the language itself, which doesn't really back up the assertions the production's trying to make.
Do you think this trend that we have, I call it a trend, but I mean, as Arion suggested earlier, it's probably been going for about 50 years, but do you think this trend for restaging and recontextualising classic works as if they have something to say about contemporary society is actually answering people's hunger to see work about contemporary society now? And people don't really go and see new plays, do they? But they clearly want to see stuff that's about the 21st century.
That's what I was about to say. There's a point where you've stretched the text to the point of saying, well, this isn't, what you're trying to say isn't what Shakespeare was saying, or it wasn't at least what he was primarily saying. So if you want to get that message across, you need to write your own play. But yeah, there is the point that people don't really go and see them.
And that said, if it's done well, then the point is that Shakespeare wrote rather well. So there's a point to keeping his words alive. And if you can find a theme that fits with vaguely what he was talking about, then you get the benefit of his lovely poetry. And hopefully you can also say something about contemporary society as well.
Well, I'm going to call an end to proceedings there, and apologies to those of you who found that last discussion very Moorish. That's it for this episode of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Holden Frith, Arion McNicoll, and Rebecca Gillie. For more from The Week, you need to visit theweek.co.uk. You can download The Weekday, which is our free iPhone app, or of course you can subscribe to the magazine. And remember to subscribe to this to hear brand new episodes of The Week Unwrapped every week. All you need to do is subscribe to our podcast feed. There's probably an app for that on your phone. If not, you can find us on Stitcher, TuneIn, Pocket Casts, wherever there are podcasts, there we shall be. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, and the producer is Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.